You weren't sent here to blend in. You weren't meant to follow their rules, to shrink, to play it safe. No, you were chosen, set apart, called for something bigger. They watched you, studied you, tried to predict your next move, thinking they could control the outcome. But what they never realized was that you weren't playing their game. You were building something greater, something unstoppable. While they schemed in the dark, believing they held all the power, the truth was already unfolding. Because the storm they never saw coming wasn't just fate, it was you. They thought they could erase, manipulate, rewrite history to suit their agenda. But destiny doesn't bend to deception. Every move they made, every whisper they spoke, every plan they crafted against you was documented, not by you, but by time itself. And when the moment of reckoning came, when they reached for control, all they found was a mirror reflecting their own undoing. So now, stand tall. This was never about revenge. It was about revelation. You don't need to fight for justice. Justice is already in motion. You don't need to prove anything. The proof was written before they even moved against you. The ark you were commanded to build was never for them. It was for you, for your purpose, for what's coming next. They thought they had power. They thought they had control. They were wrong. For they have sown the wind, and they shall reap the whirlwind. Hosea 8:7. They thought they were master builders, weaving a web so delicate, so intricate, that no one would ever see the strands. They moved in secret, convinced their design was flawless, their control unshakable. But when you build a house out of lies, even the smallest crack will bring it down. At first, it was imperceptible. A loose thread here, a small inconsistency there. They thought they had buried every trace, wiped every record, erased every footprint. But arrogance breeds blind spots, and the more they manipulated, the more evidence they left behind. Like thieves too careless in their escape, they didn't realize they were leaving a trail, one so clear that when the truth finally rose, it led straight back to them. And then, the moment came. The moment where reality overtook illusion. The moment where the carefully arranged story, the one they thought would stand forever, shattered in an instant. They had spent so much time crafting their version of events, so much time ensuring they controlled the narrative, that they never even considered one simple truth. They were not the ones writing the ending. The words they whispered in secrecy had never truly faded. The conversations they thought were hidden had been written into time itself. The records they believed were destroyed had never left. Their own hands had unknowingly documented every move, every deception, every misstep. And when the light hit, when the curtain was finally pulled back, they did not see what they expected. They saw themselves, their own words, their own actions, their own manipulation, laid out, clear, undeniable. The panic set in fast, confidence flipping into fear. Because they were never the ones pulling the strings, they were the ones caught in the trap they had set for someone else. And the trap had already snapped shut. Now, they stand on shifting ground, desperately grasping for the control they once wielded. But it is gone. The story they tried to bury has risen beyond their reach. The power they thought they held has vanished like smoke. They had believed themselves to be untouchable, but in their arrogance, they forgot one thing. You cannot escape the weight of your own deception. And now, as they look around at the wreckage of their own making, as they watch the last remnants of their empire collapse, they finally understand they did not build a kingdom. They built a grave. For nothing is hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be known and brought to light. Luke 8:17. They walked into that room expecting victory, believing they had the final word. They had written the script, orchestrated every detail, convinced the ending was theirs to control. But pride blinds. And when the moment of truth arrived, it did not ask for permission. It arrived in the glow of a screen that didn't bend to their will, a screen that did not manipulate, did not twist, did not hide, a screen that simply played back reality, raw and unfiltered. And what they saw was themselves, not the version they had carefully crafted, not the image they had projected, but the truth, the unvarnished, undeniable truth. Every deception, every scheme, every whispered betrayal stood exposed in piercing clarity. No excuses, no filters, no way out. You are not here by accident. If you feel the pull, the knowing deep inside that you are chosen, this is your moment. Click the super thank you button and give $50 or more to unlock deeper insights, exclusive content, and a path that aligns with your divine purpose. This isn't just a contribution. It's a declaration, a step toward who you were meant to be. Answer the call, walk with us, and step fully into your destiny. Your journey begins now. The weight of it hit like a wave, knocking the breath from their lungs. Their bodies froze, their hands clenched, their faces locked in expressions they could no longer control. For years, they had mastered the art of deception. But in this moment, their own reflection betrayed them. They tried to process it, tried to reason, but reason could not erase what had already been sealed in time. The room shrank around them. The air grew thick. The silence stretched on, louder than any denial, heavier than any excuse. The truth had arrived, and truth does not bargain. They reached for control, but control was no longer theirs. They reached for justification, but justification was already out of reach. Every escape route had been sealed. Every back door had been closed. The house they had built with deception had turned against them, its walls pressing inward, leaving no room to run. And the worst part? This wasn't someone else's doing. This wasn't a setup, a trick, a scheme orchestrated by an enemy. This was their own hands, their own voices, their own decisions, recorded in time, playing back like a prophecy fulfilled. They had expected a celebration, a final act of power. Instead, they stood face to face with the very thing they never thought would come: judgment. And judgment does not blink. Judgment does not negotiate, does not soften its edges, does not grant mercy when the time for mercy has passed. Now, they must sit in the ruins of their own making. And as the silence drags on, as they struggle to make sense of what cannot be undone, one truth remains. They were not the executioners. They were the condemned. For whatever is hidden is meant to be disclosed, and whatever is concealed is meant to be brought out into the open. Mark 4:22. They walked in with their heads high, convinced the world still bowed to their illusions. But they forgot one thing: you cannot build a kingdom on sinking sand. They whispered in secret, moved in shadows, believing their schemes were invisible, that their deception could outrun judgment. But the moment of truth does not knock, it breaks the door down. They stepped into that room thinking they were kings and queens, but as the weight of reality pressed in, they realized they were nothing more than prisoners of their own making. The walls seemed smaller now, closing in with every breath. The air felt heavier, thick with the realization that the same tools they once wielded as weapons had turned against them. The cameras they used to spy, the messages they thought were deleted, the conversations they assumed were safe, they were never in control. Everything they built in secrecy was recorded in the books of time. Panic crept into their bones as they scrambled for control. Delete, delete, delete. Fingers shaking over keyboards, over screens, desperate to erase the unerasable. They had spent years crafting facades, disguising themselves as untouchable forces. But deception is a currency that always comes due. And when the time for payment arrives, there are no extensions, no negotiations, only the weight of truth, pressing down like a storm that had been gathering long before they even saw the first cloud. They had placed their faith in illusion, in the fragile scaffolding of lies, thinking they could outmaneuver divine order. But God is not mocked, and his timing is perfect. The past does not disappear at convenience. It lingers, it watches, and it always demands its due. They reached for power, but all they found was the evidence of their own downfall. They built castles out of falsehoods, but when the foundation cracked, there was nothing left to hold them up. And now, as they stand in the ruins, staring at the undeniable, they finally understand. This was never your judgment to carry out. This was the hand of justice moving exactly as it was meant to. Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. Galatians 6:7. They thought they could outrun it. They thought they could hide from it. But truth is like a seed. It always grows, no matter how deep you try to bury it. They had spent so much time covering their tracks, erasing their footprints, rewriting the past, convinced that if they just deleted enough, if they just manipulated enough, they could erase reality itself. But what is sown must be reaped. They pressed delete, but deletion is not destruction. They wiped files, but wiping is not erasing. They thought they could control the digital world the way they controlled people, bending it to their will, making history fit their version of events. But data is not like people. It does not forget, it does not waver, and it does not bow to deception. You are here for a reason. If you feel the call, answer it. Click join to unlock exclusive content, deep insights, and a powerful community. This isn't just a membership, it's an awakening. Step into your divine purpose. Join the chosen. And then came the moment, that cold, sinking moment when they realized the trail was still there. The records they thought were gone had never truly disappeared. The past was fossilized in logs, servers, and backups they never even considered. Their own words, their own plans, their own deception, etched permanently into a system beyond their reach. They were trapped, not by you, not by an enemy, not by some outside force, but by their own hands. Every keystroke was a confession. Every action was an admission. The very tools they used to spy, deceive, and manipulate had turned against them. The system they tried to bend to their will had become their greatest enemy. And the worst part? They had no control over where the truth had spread. It moved like wind through an open field, faster than they could chase it, slipping through every grasping attempt to contain it. They tried to shut doors that were already open. They tried to erase something that had already taken root. And now it was out there. No way to stop it. No way to call it back. No way to undo the thing they swore would never see the light of day. And you never had to lift a finger, because truth defends itself. It doesn't need an army. It doesn't need an argument. It doesn't need permission to rise. They spent years trying to manipulate reality, but reality refused to be rewritten. And now, as they stand in the wreckage of their own making, staring at a story that has already been told, they finally understand. You cannot erase what was never yours to control. Therefore, whoever hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. Matthew 7:24-27. They thought they were standing on solid ground, but they were building castles out of sand. And when the tide came in, when the storm they never saw gathering finally hit, there was nothing left to hold them up. This was not an explosion. This was a slow collapse, like a building where the foundation was rotting long before the first crack appeared. One moment at a time, one lie after another, the illusion they crafted so carefully began to dissolve. They had surrounded themselves with those who clapped on command, who nodded without question, who stood by them not out of loyalty, but out of convenience. And when the ground beneath them started to shift, those same people didn't hesitate. They didn't announce their departure. They didn't make a scene. They just left. Not all at once, but one by one, stepping away quietly, distancing themselves like passengers jumping off a sinking ship. The hands that once shielded them now hovered uncertainly. The voices that once shouted in their defense now spoke in whispers. And then, inevitably, the dam broke. The cracks widened, and what was once an unshakable fortress became nothing more than a house of cards in the wind. But make no mistake, there was no redemption in their retreat, no great moral awakening. They did not walk away because they suddenly discovered integrity. They ran because they smelled disaster. They knew the collapse was coming. They felt it in the air. And when the moment finally arrived, when there was no more denying the inevitable, their exodus wasn't noble. It was survival. That's the thing about power stolen instead of earned. It doesn't last. It never does. Because when deception is the foundation, the structure is already doomed before the first brick is laid. It may stand tall for a while, looking strong, looking unmovable, looking like it will last forever. But underneath, the cracks are forming. The weight of the lies is building. And when the moment comes, when the final piece slips, it doesn't just fall, it implodes. And now, they are standing in the ruins, staring at the wreckage, realizing too late what they never wanted to believe. The tide has turned, and once it does, no one wants to be left standing in the wreckage. But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. Genesis 4:7. They thought they were untouchable. They thought they could outsmart consequence, maneuver around truth, dodge the weight of their own actions. But sin always collects its debt, and deception has an expiration date. At first, it was nothing but a shift in the air, a hesitation where there once was certainty, a subtle withdrawal from those who once clung to their every word. Smiles didn't reach the eyes anymore. Conversations cut off when they walked in. The energy in the room changed, not with rage or confrontation, but with something worse: avoidance. No one wanted to stand too close. It wasn't because these people suddenly discovered morality. No, they had known the truth all along. But as long as there was power to be gained, they didn't care. They stayed as long as there were benefits. But the moment the foundation cracked, they ran. Not out of integrity, but out of self-preservation. They saw the storm forming, and nobody wants to be left standing in a flood when the waters start rising. And then it happened, the moment of no return. A message leaked. A recording surfaced. A private conversation became public spectacle. Suddenly the whispers weren't just whispers anymore. They were proof. The rumors weren't just speculation. They were undeniable. and the ones who had once stood beside them, gone. Like a sinking ship in open water, the exodus was immediate. The same people who had cheered them on, who had defended them, who had played their part in the illusion, were now the first to vanish. Not because they had grown a conscience, but because they refused to go down with the wreckage, and the wreckage was coming fast. They scrambled, grasping at control, trying to spin the story in their favor, but their voices were swallowed by something stronger, the truth. The same manipulation they once wielded like a sword now worked against them. The same deception they used to climb was now pulling them under. They never thought this day would come. They had convinced themselves they were above it all, that they could orchestrate events forever without consequence. But the thing about sin, it never stays hidden. The thing about truth, it never stays silent. And now, as they watch the life they built disintegrate under the weight of their own deception, they finally understand. It wasn't you they needed to fear. It was the moment they could no longer outrun the inevitable. Desperation set in as their constructed narrative slipped irretrievably away, leaving them scrambling hopelessly to repair damage already burned into public consciousness. They flooded the airwaves with hollow clarifications, frantically building stories no one cared to believe, blaming others, shifting accusations, even portraying themselves as misunderstood victims of jealousy. But reality had already set, hardening like concrete around their feet. Each attempt to rewrite history only made them look more guilty, each apology falling flat under scrutiny. Their reputation wasn't merely stained, it was permanently branded, incapable of being restored. Former allies abandoned ship without hesitation, not from moral awakening, but pure self-preservation, cutting ties to save their own skin. Conversations continued without them, their presence now an uncomfortable liability rather than a powerful magnet. The harder they fought, the quicker they drowned in their own desperation. No amount of carefully worded statements, hurried deletions, or superficial changes could alter the trajectory. Their attempts became futile performances, transparent to anyone watching. Truth had already cast judgment, and nothing could reverse that verdict once delivered. Be still, and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. Psalm 46:10. They thought they could rewrite the ending, that they could twist reality to fit their narrative. But truth is like a lion. It needs no defense, no explanation, no battle to be won. It stands on its own. And as they fought, as they scrambled, as they clawed at the edges of control, they didn't realize they were only tightening the noose around their own deception. They ran in circles, searching for exits that no longer existed, spinning explanations so fast they tripped over their own words. But the walls had already closed in, and there was nowhere left to run. They thought they could erase. They thought they could manipulate. They thought they could outmaneuver the inevitable. But there are some things you cannot outrun. And you didn't lift a finger, because this was never your battle to fight. They expected war. They expected you to retaliate, to plead your case, to step onto the battlefield with them. They were waiting for it, needing it, because without your reaction, without your anger, without your resistance, they had nothing to push against. But you gave them silence, and silence is the loudest judgment of all. They moved recklessly, thinking that if they screamed their lies loud enough, they would become truth. But deception is a fragile thing. The more they tried to prop it up, the faster it collapsed. And now, as they stand in the rubble of their own making, grasping at pieces that no longer fit together, they realize too late, the storm was never you. It was always inside them. Because truth is like fire. It purifies, it refines, and it consumes everything that cannot withstand the heat. They wanted you in the flames. They wanted to see you burned, see you crumble, see you fight for air. But fire does not destroy what has already been forged in the heat. You were never the one in danger. They were. Because the fire they lit wasn't sent to consume you. It was sent to reveal them. And now they are left staring at the ashes, realizing that the only thing they ever truly destroyed was themselves. They had spent so much time waging war against a phantom enemy, convinced you would retaliate in kind, but they never grasped the truth. Justice has a rhythm of its own. It moves unseen, swift and unwavering, unburdened by human interference. There was no need for you to engage, no need to force retribution. What was meant to collapse did so under its own weight. And that was the final blow. While they spiraled, while they were consumed by the wreckage of their own deceit, you remained untouchable. No words, no declarations, no desperate grasp at control, just quiet certainty. They had been waiting for the storm to hit, but they never realized they were the storm. Every sleepless night, every regret they whispered into the darkness, every moment of realization that they had built their own demise, was a reckoning they could never escape. And in the silence, they understood what true consequence felt like. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. The Lord has done this, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Psalm 118, 22-23. They thought they were the architects, the ones who laid the foundation, the ones who held the blueprints to the future. But you cannot build a fortress on sinking sand. They crafted their world out of deception, convinced they could mold reality to their will. Every lie, every whispered betrayal, every false promise, stacked high like bricks in a tower, meant to last forever. But God is not mocked. A structure built on deceit cannot hold. They believed they could reinforce it with silence, secure it with manipulation, anchor it in secrecy. But nothing hidden stays hidden. Nothing buried stays buried. When the truth rises, it does not ask for permission. It does not knock. It kicks the door down. And when it came, there was no shelter. The walls they had so carefully constructed began to crack. Not all at once, but piece by piece, moment by moment. The same hands that once built with confidence began to tremble. The same voices that once dictated reality fell silent. Because the thing about deception is that it can only exist in the absence of light. The moment truth steps in, the illusion is over. They told themselves they were in control, that their version of events, their carefully placed narratives, their orchestrated illusions would stand the test of time. But a house of cards cannot withstand the wind. And as that first gust came, they watched in horror as everything they built began to fall, because the weight of lies is heavier than they ever imagined. And as the foundation crumbled beneath them, it wasn't just their falsehoods that collapsed. It was everything. Every connection built on manipulation, every alliance formed in secrecy, every illusion that kept their empire intact, gone. And you did not have to push. You did not have to fight, to expose, to reveal. Truth does not need a defender. It moves on its own, unstoppable, undeniable. You simply stood firm, because while they were playing games in the dark, you were standing in the light. And when the storm came, it did not touch you. But them, they never saw it coming. They had spent so much time looking outward, obsessing over your downfall, anticipating your collapse, that they never noticed the walls closing in on them. While they crafted their traps, They ignored the simple truth. The game they were playing was rigged against them from the start. The power they once wielded slipped through their fingers like sand. Their influence crumbled, their alliances disintegrated. The same voices that once echoed in agreement now spoke only in whispers of condemnation. And the worst part? It was never you that needed saving. It was them. They were the ones in freefall, spiraling toward a fate they had unknowingly chosen. The damage was irreversible, the reckoning unavoidable. And through it all, you stood firm. No retaliation, no defense, no need for justification, because the truth had never been in question. It was only a matter of time before it revealed itself. Now, as they stand in the wreckage of their own making, you move forward, untouched, unshaken, because you were never meant to break. They were.